He underestimated me for years, mocking my silence and mistaking my kindness for weakness. It started subtly, almost like background noise you don't notice until it gets loud enough to pierce through everything. In school, in work, in social gatherings, he always had something sarcastic to say, some backhanded compliment wrapped in a smirk, a dismissive laugh that echoed louder than anyone else's. I used to brush it off. I believed in giving people benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe he was just insecure, maybe he didn't know how his words cut deeper than knives. I believed that staying silent and keeping peace was more important than confronting someone whose ego thrived on conflict. He saw that silence and interpreted it as fear. He looked at the way I avoided confrontation and assumed I was scared of him, that I didn't speak up because I lacked the strength to. What he didn't understand was that I was watching. I was learning. I saw how he manipulated others, how he played games with people's emotions, how he twisted the truth to suit his narrative. I took notes in silence, not because I was weak, but because I was preparing for something he'd never see coming. But back then, all he saw was someone who would never bite back, someone he could humiliate without consequences. It wasn't just him laughing. I noticed how others would start to follow. People who didn't even know me well would join in on the jokes, treating me like I was the punchline to some story they didn't even understand. He set the tone, and the rest followed. That's the power someone like him holds when they think they're untouchable, when they believe no one will ever challenge their version of the truth. And every time I didn't respond, it gave him more fuel. He started pushing boundaries. Insults became personal, public, louder. He began to interfere in areas he had no business in, like my work, my relationships, and my future. He started using influence to quietly sabotage me, thinking I'd never notice, thinking I wouldn't fight back. I remember one day in particular. He called me out in front of everyone during a meeting, tried to humiliate me for a mistake I didn't even make. I sat there, face burning, heart pounding, not from shame, but from the fire he had just lit in me. That moment became the turning point. He thought he had won. He thought he had shown everyone how incompetent or clueless I was. But he didn't realize that people who are quiet don't stay quiet forever, especially not when they're being dismantled piece by piece. He thought his laughter and words would break me down, but all they did was build me up. Every time he mocked me, he gave me a new reason to grow, to study harder, work smarter, move more strategically. He never noticed that the quiet kid he bullied had started waking up earlier, staying up later, becoming more disciplined, more focused. While he was busy building an image, I was building a foundation. I kept my head down, not out of shame, but out of dedication. I didn't need applause or validation. I just needed time. And that's the one thing he never saw slipping away. Years went by and the game changed, but his view of me didn't. He still thought I was the same person who would shrink back when challenged, who would take insult after insult without ever pushing back. He didn't realize I had evolved. He didn't notice that I had stopped reacting, because I didn't need it anymore. I had gathered everything: evidence, strength, influence. While he was laughing, I was calculating. While he was flaunting, I was planning. He mistook patience for passivity. He mistook silence for surrender. And that mistake was about to cost him more than he could imagine. When he crossed the line and tried to destroy everything I worked for, I knew it was time to rise. There's a difference between someone who annoys you and someone who actively targets you. He made that shift deliberately, like it was a game to him. At first, it was just verbal jabs, but soon enough, it became sabotage. He started interfering with my progress, talking behind my back to people who had influence, twisting facts, injecting doubts into the minds of those I relied on. He went beyond disrespect. He became a threat to everything I had built with my own two hands. And the worst part was how confidently he did it, as if he believed he was invincible, as if no one would ever stop him. He smiled through lies, spread rumors like wildfire, whispering poison into ears that were too lazy or too shallow to verify the truth. My name started to become associated with things I never said, actions I never took. Suddenly, people were questioning my competence, my loyalty, even my character. People I had trusted started acting distant. their voices carrying a tone of suspicion that hadn't been there before. And all of it traced back to him. He was orchestrating a quiet destruction behind the scenes, all while maintaining his charming facade. There's something terrifying about realizing someone is trying to erase your efforts, not because of anything you did wrong, but because they're intimidated by your potential. He saw what I could become. He saw the momentum I had, the respect I was earning, and instead of confronting his own insecurities, he decided to burn down everything around me so he wouldn't feel small. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about his fear that I might surpass him, that I might expose him. And so he struck first, thinking if he hit hard enough, I'd never get back up. But that was the miscalculation. Because some people, when pushed to the edge, don't fall, they transform. That was the moment the version of me he thought he knew ceased to exist. I had spent too long letting people write the story for me, staying in the background while others decided who I was. But now, the fire had been lit. I wasn't going to defend myself with words anymore. I was going to let my actions speak so loud that no lie could silence them. It started with reclaiming my power in silence. I began working in the shadows, the same way he had. But the difference was, I wasn't operating from fear or ego. I was rebuilding my reputation, reconnecting with the people who truly knew me, bringing clarity where there had been confusion. I didn't lash out. I calculated. I became meticulous in every move, deliberate in every decision. I started investing in my growth with ferocity he'd never seen before. While he celebrated my supposed downfall, I was rewriting my blueprint for a comeback he wouldn't be able to anticipate, let alone stop. I learned that rising doesn't always mean loud confrontation. Sometimes it means becoming undeniable, making your value so clear, your strength so visible, that even your enemies start to doubt their own narratives. I didn't just want to recover. I wanted to evolve into someone so resilient, so precise, that no one could ever try this again. Not him. Not anyone. He didn't realize that by trying to destroy me, he had actually given me the clarity I never had before. The clarity to see who my real allies were. The clarity to recognize my own strength. The clarity to stop asking for approval and start demanding respect through action. He thought he had backed me into a corner, but what he actually did was give me the push I needed to break through the wall. The truth is, I had been playing small for too long, waiting for the right moment, the right support, the right conditions. But a betrayal showed me there's no such thing as the right time. Sometimes you have to make the moment yours. He had no idea that by trying to end my journey, he had just ignited a new one that would leave him looking over his shoulder, realizing the person he tried to erase was no longer someone he could control, manipulate, or silence. I transformed myself quietly, mentally, emotionally, and strategically until I had the power to strike back. It wasn't a loud process. There were no announcements, no dramatic declarations, just quiet decisions made in dark rooms, early mornings spent in solitude, and late nights studying not just what I needed to do, but who I needed to become. The version of me he thought he knew was dissolving with every step I took, replaced by someone sharper, calmer, and infinitely more dangerous in silence. He never noticed a change because he never paid enough attention to the parts of me that didn't scream for validation. But that's where my transformation lived, in the shadows, far from the noise he was so addicted to. The mental transformation came first. I had to unlearn the lies I'd been told, and the ones I had started to believe about myself. All my life, people equated silence with weakness, humility with submission, and kindness with vulnerability. And somewhere along the way, I began to internalize that. I let people talk over me, make decisions for me, laugh at me. But the moment I saw how easily someone could try to erase me, it flipped a switch. I began to question every belief I had about my limitations. I started reading more, learning how the mind works, how people manipulate, how power is perceived. I taught myself how to stay calm in chaos, how to respond without reacting, how to observe without being seen. I didn't need to win arguments anymore. I needed to win control over myself. Emotionally, I hardened, not in a way that made me cold, but in a way that made me unshakable. The things that once triggered me, the people who once had power over my emotions, began to lose their grip. I built a kind of emotional discipline most people don't even realize exists. I learned how to sit in discomfort, how to use pain as a tool instead of a burden. I stopped craving validation from people who never wanted to see me rise in the first place. I became self-contained, and in that emotional self-sufficiency, I found a version of myself that didn't need revenge to feel strong, just clarity and control. I didn't want to act out of rage. I wanted to move with purpose. The strategic transformation was the most dangerous part, and the most invisible. I began mapping out everything. My relationships, my skills, my weaknesses, my resources. I started positioning myself where it mattered, aligning with people who actually had substance, influence, and vision. I stopped wasting time on superficial connections and started building a real network. Quietly, he was too busy celebrating his imaginary victories to notice that I was collecting allies, information, and leverage. Every move I made from that point forward was intentional. I stopped reacting to insults and started responding with results. I created opportunities for myself that no one could deny, not even him. I also studied him. Not the version he showed the world, but the real one. His insecurities, his patterns, his need for attention, his desperation to stay on top even when he had no substance to offer. And once you understand something like that, you don't have to fight them directly. You can dismantle them from the inside out. I stopped giving him the fuel he needed. I didn't rise to the bait, didn't defend myself where it didn't matter. Instead, I let his actions expose him while I kept climbing. The higher I went, the smaller he started to look in the eyes of everyone watching. The beauty of silent transformation is that no one prepares for it. They keep attacking who you used to be, not realizing they're playing a game they've already lost. And by the time they look up to see who they're dealing with, it's too late. I didn't need to announce my return. My presence spoke for itself. I didn't need to yell, threaten, or prove anything anymore. I had already done that through action, through consistency, through the patience to become someone who couldn't be broken the same way twice. He thought he was dealing with the same person who used to flinch at his jokes and shrink in his shadow. But I had rebuilt myself into someone who no longer needed to hide. Someone who didn't just survive the fire, but learned how to control it. And now, without even lifting a finger, I had become a force he didn't know how to stand against. By the time I exposed him and took back control, he couldn't even say my name without trembling. It didn't happen overnight, and that's what made it powerful. Every step I took was calculated. Every move grounded in patience, and every word I spoke carried the weight of the storm that had been building for years. He never saw it coming because he was so focused on tearing me down. He forgot to look at what I was building right under his nose. He underestimated how dangerous someone can become when they have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. And in the end, that underestimation became the very thing that broke him. The exposure wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet, methodical, and perfectly timed. I had gathered everything. Proof of his lies, his manipulation, the way he used people, the webs of deceit he wove to maintain his illusion of control. People had started noticing inconsistencies long before I made my move, but no one had the courage to speak up. I didn't just speak. I showed them the truth, laid out like a mirror they couldn't look away from. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming my identity, my name, and every piece of respect he tried to strip away. I remember the look on his face when it all started to unravel. The confidence drained from his eyes, replaced by confusion, then panic. He tried to laugh it off at first, pretend like it was all just misunderstanding, but no one was buying it anymore. The mask he wore so comfortably began to crack, and behind it was someone terrified of being seen for who he really was. Someone who had built his entire persona on the illusion of power, now exposed as a fraud by the very person he tried to erase. It was poetic in the most brutal way. Taking back control wasn't just about making him fall. It was about rising without needing to destroy myself in the process. I walked into rooms I used to feel invisible in and spoke with the kind of authority that can't be faked. People listened differently now. They looked at me with respect instead of pity, with recognition instead of dismissal. My story had changed, not just in their eyes, but in mine. I had rewritten the narrative that he tried to author for me. I wasn't the victim. I was the force that changed the course of everything, and he felt that change. Every time someone mentioned my name, he flinched, not because of fear alone, but because of guilt, because he knew what he did. He knew what he tried to take. He remembered every smirk, every cruel joke, every attempt to break my spirit. And now, all of it came back to haunt him, not in the form of threats or revenge, but through the simple, undeniable fact that I had become everything he said I couldn't be. My existence was the loudest rebuke to his narrative. I didn't need to scream it. My presence did all the talking. He avoided conversations that included me, dodged eye contact, skipped events where he knew I'd be present. People started to notice. His name began to carry a different weight too, one tied to deceit, manipulation, and fear, while mine carried growth, resilience, and truth. I had turned the tables without stooping to his level. That's the part that shook him the most. He had always assumed that power came from dominance, from volume, from fear. But I showed him that true power comes from self-mastery, from control, from being able to endure the worst and still choose a higher road without ever forgetting the path that got you there. There's a silence that follows exposure, an eerie stillness where people don't know what to say because they're processing everything they missed. That's what surrounded him. The silence of people realizing they'd followed the wrong person, believed the wrong story. And he had to sit with that, with the knowledge that his greatest weapon, fear, was now useless against someone who had walked through fire and emerged unburned. He could no longer use my name as a punchline or my past as a weapon, because now my name didn't remind him of weakness. It reminded him of the moment he lost.